as they left Mizraim, they sang songs of the great exploits of Yahweh and the freedom they felt from being from underneath the bondage of Mizraim. All right. Now, that's read in Exodus 15, 1 through 21. I'm not going to read a whole lot, but just wanted to put where I'm coming from. All right. That's joy over being free from slavery. Next, they went to their first grumble at Marah over the bitter waters. Let's remember the children of Israel had just 3 days with no water at the wilderness of Shur. But Yah showed himself faithful by making the water sweet at Marah and tried their hearts. I do want to read that Exodus 15, 26 through 27. And he said, if you diligently obey the voice of Yahweh your Elohim and do what is right in his eyes, and shall listen to his commands and shall guard all his laws, I shall bring on you none of the diseases are brought on to Mizraim, for I am Yahweh who heals you. And they came to Elim, where there were 12 fountains of water and 70 palm trees, and they camped there by the waters. Granted, we know these events happened within the first few days of leaving Mizraim, but we know their unleavening process took a generation dying off in order to overcome the treachery caused by perpetual enslavement. As Torah keepers, we know that throughout the Exodus, the children of Israel repeatedly, they would rather die in slavery for a pot of meat and bread or allow their anxiety from perpetual abandonment convince them to contradict their own best interests, i.e., they would rather worship the golden calf instead of waiting on Moshe's word from Yahweh. Most believers of Yahweh, of the scriptures, including myself, would look at our ancestors and say, all you had to do was listen. All you had to do was listen. Yah said he would take care of you, but you couldn't get right. The question that I pondered for a long time is, do we really truly understand the long-term effects of the enslavement on our people? Can trauma from a century or so of enslavement and oppression be the reason for how they consistently reacted? It was as if it was more comfortable to stay in that mindset than trust the process. The trauma of enslavement. A study of the male offspring's lifespan of POW camp survivors after the American Civil War. All right, a study was done where researchers took 20,000 records of children of Union soldiers from the Civil War who fought between 1861 to 1865. The researchers looked at the lives of men in 3 groups whose fathers fought in the war. 2 were in prison, and 1 avoided imprisonment altogether. The first group, the sons of the POWs were, there were sons of POWs who were severely brutalized. The second one was less extreme. In the third group, they avoided it altogether, all right? They measured the group to age 45. The first group had a 9% higher probability of dying at any given year to those of the second group, an 11% higher probability than the third group. The early deaths were caused by strokes and cancer, according to the research. That was only 4 years. It was only 4 years. Study of children of Holocaust survivors. The funny thing about this is the VA uses that when it comes to vets. All right. I know we talked about this years ago, but I didn't know that the researcher was doing it to help vets. This research was done by Dr. Raquel Yehuda, in which she studied the children of concentration camp survivors. Her study yielded into how severe psychophysiological trauma can have intergenerational effects. Now, for some of those who know, I know you know, it's called epigenetics. It's one of the youngest sciences. I think it's like 1942 when it started. So they're slowly compiling it. Anyway, Dr. Yehuda stated that parental trauma is a relative contributor to offspring biology. That does not, the trauma does not change the DNA, but it does mark it. Many of those offspring show signs of depression and anxiety. The research is being used to help American veterans and their children with treatment plans. The concentration camps of World War II only lasted what, about 12 years? Probably longer, but 12 years, give or take. Post-traumatic slave syndrome. All right. It's a theory and a book written by Dr. Joy DeGraw, where she compiled 12 years of quantitative and qualitative research used to explain the multi-generational trauma and oppression of African Americans and how it has affected us socially, psychologically, and physically. How long were we? We got to also not only take ours, but all our brothers and sisters around the world who have dealt with this. Some got out a little bit earlier than us. Some just got out recently within the past 10, 20 years. I know in the Middle East, they still doing some of this. I wanted to show y'all a little bit of our pain points, the things we deal with or are still dealing with because of that. Just think about it. We have higher rates of congestive heart failure than any other group. Higher rates of diabetes and hypertension. Higher rates of poor mental health, namely major depressive disorder and chronic depression. I know we didn't think that, but we do. We just better at hiding it. Higher rates and longer periods of post-traumatic stress disorder. Highest divorce rates, lowest marital rate. Now that recently happened within the past 30, 40 years. We had the highest drugs and welfare. Kind of did that. In our culture, we have learned to bury our trauma and keep pushing. That works for a time, but a great elder shared this wisdom with me. As a young man, it's easier to compartmentalize your issues and use it as fuel to drive you. But as you age, your brain becomes frustrated with you about ignoring its cry for help. Do not make the same mistakes that we made. He said that to me and others as I attended a group session at the VA in 2019. After months of my wife and young son having to deal with my explosive outbursts of rage. My child also had to deal with the thrashing in my sleep and screams in the night. I have not been scared of very much since leaving the Marine Corps, but I was scared I was going to lose my family to something I felt like I couldn't control. I already had insomnia, and whatever was going on in my dreams were showing itself in my awakened state. Just so y'all know, I had horrible nightmares after my first tour. It was easy to get away from people. It's a little bit harder when you're around your family and they don't know what's going on. To the point to where I stopped having nightmares when I got out the Marine Corps. I was just happy. I didn't even care. I didn't question it. I was just happy. It's not that I stopped having dreams. I just didn't remember it. That's all it was. I always ask y'all, I say, what's going on with me? I eventually sought help and found out that I was having flashbacks. I got so good at burying my trauma that my brain would take the liberty of sleep to convince me to deal with my trauma. Your mind and your heart, they're one. Lamed bait. Is that what The lack of sleep I developed over the years played a part in my brain now being able to face me while I was awake. One thing I learned in counseling was that the problems like rage and anger can infect, and as my sister said, bleed over on the whole family. And your children will normalize it faster than any other emotion. The crazy part about it is I thought I was just having panic attacks. I remember the day we were watching a movie. Lemuel started crying. I felt the same feeling I felt when I was in the Marine Corps. I have not felt that thing since 2008. Before I knew it, I was throwing stuff. I was yelling. I was so ashamed. I ran to my car and I drove off. I am thankful for my wife and being an example of overcoming trauma and having the patience to endure with me. I did not want her to shoulder the burden that I carried, but I'm glad that my favor showed me favor. This is something that Yeshua called for us to do in the same vein as the second greatest commandment. This is my command, that you love one another as I have loved you. Bear one another's burdens and so complete the Torah of Messiah. That is hard because we've been trained, even from the church. You just ain't got enough faith. You just ain't got enough faith. Most people go through the process of PTS. Most people overcome. That post-traumatic stress is, not everybody gets it. Most people get over the trauma that they deal with. The problem is when you have trauma upon trauma upon trauma upon trauma and not being able to deal with the first, you eventually just compartmentalize it. And men are very good at that. Women are too. Women are too. Your greatest gift in your vein and your worst enemy is your emotions. And y'all are better at expressing it than us. For us, we are told not to even tell any woman about how we feel. Don't tell, don't share that. She's going to use it against you. I don't know where we get it from. I don't know where we get it from, but that's what we learn. But then we get married. And if a person finds that favor, they realize that favor is going to be there. That favor is going to shoulder you. But yet, I know the bosom, y'all got the bosom. So we fall into the bosom. I'm just say that. We got the shoulders, you got the bosom. So as men, we are to shoulder each other's burdens. Proverbs 17:17, a friend loves at all times and a brother is born for adversity. Ecclesiasticus, a faithful friend is a strong defense, and he that has found such a one has found a treasure. That's the friend that's going to jump in that hole because he had already come up with a plan. He had already fell in there before. A faithful friend is the medicine of life, and they that fear Yah shall find him. From a Torah student standpoint, we know our hearts and minds are connected. We not only circumcise our hearts to walk with Yah, but also circumcise our hearts to overcome the bitter roots of trauma, both generationally and personally. Let's get to the heart. Deuteronomy 10:15-16. Yah delighted only in your fathers to love them, and he chose their seed after them, You above all people as it is today. And you shall circumcise the foreskin of your hearts and harden your neck no more. That's easy to do. When you're faced with yourself, it's easy to harden your neck. It's easy to say, I got this. It's easy to keep pushing through. I realize that your brain corrects itself all the time. And I truly believe the older I got, the more I couldn't deal with it, to where now I have to deal with it. In my mind, that was Yahweh. To me, that was Yahweh. Proverbs 4:23, watch over your lamed bait with all diligence, for out of it are the issues of life. What happens to our ancestors can determine what happens to us, but the effects are reversible. We will overcome. We can overcome, and we will overcome. We will become more honest with each other. We will love each other. We will try our best to shoulder the burdens of our brothers and sisters, either through prayer or accountability, because sometimes accountability is exactly what we need. We need that accountability. We need that brother or sister to say, hey, you okay? Hey, what you dealing with? Hey, I had a problem today. Man, I did too. I know. I can see it all over your face. What's going on? These are things that truly is going to show the world, especially during this time, because we say a lot of stuff, man. We say a lot of stuff. But when we start loving ourselves and loving our brothers and uplifting our brothers and sisters and begin to circumcise our own hearts, because circumcision is not only, like I said, for keeping the commandments, it's also circumcision so that your house will be well equipped for those who need it. You overcoming your traumas, go help other people overcome their traumas. When they sit there and say, I can't do it, and sometimes we hate when other people be like, hey, yes, you can. You know, I went through it. I don't want to hear that. I don't want to hear that. You don't want to hear it because you're not ready to face what happened. But at that time, you probably needed it. You probably needed somebody to say that. Because when we get to ourselves, we think about these things. Amen.